2 o'clock, so we're going to call the meeting for April 2nd of the Rules and Open Government Committee to order. Let's have roll, please.
Candelas.
Here.
Tuan.
Here.
Foley. Kami. Absent.
Whatever.
Cohen.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right. Thank you. We will start by doing our review for next Tuesday's council meeting, which has a 9:30 closed session, 1:30 regular session with a canceled evening session. Consent starts on page 5 and continues on pages 6, 7, 8, and 9. Section 3, we have a appeals hearing board interview and a health retirement pension plan healthcare actuarial valuation report. Section 6, we have an action related to San Jose clean energy resource adequacy, and 6.2 is deferred till the 22nd. Item 8.1 is the first-time home buyer loan program, and we have 2 items on land use related to early consideration for 2 downtown projects. Do we have any members of the public here to speak?
No public comment.
No public comment. Back to the committee. Is there a motion?
A second. With the ads sheet.
Oh, yep. Yep, there's one item on the ad sheet. Okay, let's vote. Motion carries 4-0 with Kamei absent. And now we're on to our first review of the Tuesday, April 15th agenda. The 9:30 closed session, 1:30 regular session, and consent starts on page 5. Continues on page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, and we have a very light agenda, nothing on sections 3, 4, 5. We do have one item in section 6, which is a construction contract for improvements to the wastewater facility, and we have Columbus Park revitalization plan under section 7. There's also a study session after the council meeting that day on parks, but that's a separate agenda. Looks like we have no public comment.
No public comment.
So do we have a motion on this agenda?
Move for approval. Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. No comments? All right, let's vote. Still waiting for, oh, there you go. All right.
Sorry.
Motion carries 4-0.
I've never done this before.
All right, now we're on to our consent calendar. Do we have any public? No? Now we're going back on the consent calendar. Today we have 5 items, including our monthly audit activity. Thank you, Joe, for being here. We have no public comments, so do we have a motion to accept the consent calendar?
So moved. Second.
All right, let's vote. Motion carries 4-0. And now we have our one action item. This is the return to the committee of the Van Lording item memo signed by myself along with Councilmember Dwan, the mayor, and Councilmember Mulcahy. We have an early consideration form that was returned with 2 items on it. I'll ask one more time. Looks like we don't have any public comment, although Omar is here to answer any questions if necessary. We'll come back to committee for any comments, questions, or a motion. Okay, Vice Mayor Foley.
Just a question. So this was greenlit, but yellow lit for budget process. I'm curious which duties that the staff is working on now will get delayed because of this.
Good afternoon, Vice Mayor Foley, Omar Passons, Deputy City Manager. So I think the way to look at that is more like there are two alternatives. Staff's recommendation is to greenlight a specific like incorporation into the direction that you all provided in the March message, which included analysis of gaps in ordinances related to things that are happening out in our community. And I think this item that your colleagues brought forward is an example of one of those gaps. And so it makes sense to handle those things in concert. So we're really under the green. If you approve the green recommendation, it doesn't slow the work, it actually speeds it up.
My question was, what is getting slowed down to take, what is currently being worked on that won't be worked on when this is sped up?
Oh, no. So I think the March message item is currently being worked on. That's the return for the budget study session around an evaluation of ordinances associated with issues that are occurring on the streets. It's the same attorneys, the same staff, et cetera, that are working on that body of work. And so greenlighting this would incorporate it into that body of work. Yellow lighting it would mean we would need to find an entire sort of separate train to address just this issue moving forward. The rest of the analysis that would be necessary for this item.
I guess the inverse question is, what is it that the green light, what is it that we would get additionally if we took the yellow light option that won't occur because we approve the green light option, or is there any significant difference between the two?
I don't think there's go ahead, Angel.
Yeah, Councilmember. So the biggest difference would be if you went with the yellow lit option, it's actual specific recommendations and ordinance recommendations. The green light, what the green light approach does is it does all the analysis within the context of the March budget message, and it provides some of the options that council can consider. But to do a more in-depth, like come up with an actual ordinance, some recommendations tied to that ordinance, that would require deeper drill down and more work.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry,
Yeah, no,
is this more legal work then?
Yes.
Than anything? So this is more
That is correct.
of additional weight on
Crafting
legal
ordinances.
Well, it's just maybe just to clarify on that point. So it's sort of legal plus, because of course, while the lawyers have to draft the ordinance, because it's on the multiple departments to actually implement that program, there's a lot of back and forth that would be necessary. So it is the lawyers that have to draft it, but there's an awful lot of additional staff-related work there.
I understand, but we're just talking about the drafting of an ordinance right now, aren't we? Isn't that what's being greenlit? Because there's going to be budgetary requirements anyway as we look to additional staff, isn't there?
So there will be budgetary implications of any ordinance that might come forward, but what I'm saying is the work necessary for the lawyers to draft an ordinance, it's not merely, they're not at the point where it's just, okay, we're ready, we know what we need to draft, let's go draft it by ourselves. They actually need a bunch of analysis from the departments to complete the work necessary around what the scope of that ordinance would be. And so that's why, they're having to weigh, frankly, the various other aspects of these other gap analysis that are part of the March message direction. And so doing one without the other creates a couple really big challenges.
I appreciate that, and it's not that I object to where you're going on this, but what I would like to see when these things come to us is what the real trade-offs are. We're at City Council, we're told, well, you've added something more to my plate, but you haven't taken anything away, and we can't get it done. So when this comes to me, I'm thinking, okay, we've got several EIHs that are supposed to be going. We've got all these other ordinances that are being worked on. Which one isn't going to be worked on? Which project isn't going to be pursued as a result? If it's none, it's none, and that's what I want to hear. If it is something, I want to hear what the trade-off is, because we get accused all the time of adding to staff's workload without taking anything off. So this is something, I don't want to add to staff's workload. I want their work to get done, and I want to make sure they can get done with what we're trying to accomplish here.
I think the simple answer, the most direct answer, is that treating this ordinance as calling for a standalone ordinance aside from the March budget message will result in this body of work taking much longer, because there aren't people to do this work right now within that 90-day window that you all have in the memo.
So let me see if I can clarify that a little bit. It's a little confusing the way this is being presented, because certainly we want the fastest approach, we want the complete approach, but it sounds to me like what we're saying, though, is that the yellow is not yet moving forward with an ordinance drafting, but doing an analysis that would then eventually potentially lead to the creation of an ordinance, but we wouldn't necessarily yet, by moving this forward, be approving the creation of the ordinance. We would be approving the analysis. And that yellow is asking to get the analysis, the actual ordinance done more quickly, which takes more staff time. But the analysis part, because of what's already in the budget message, doesn't take more staff time. Does that cover it? Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah.
I think that's the point. We're not, so if we took the green light option here, we're saying, yes, we still think this is important to evaluate, but we have not decided until it comes back to council later to actually ask the attorney's office to draft the ordinance. Whereas if we took the yellow option, we're basically saying move forward with the ordinance and bring it back.
That's right. It just would take longer. That's the trade-off, is the timing.
Right. So okay. I'll call on Councilmember Dewan, although you're showing up as Councilmember Kamei because you're sitting in the wrong seat. Go ahead.
Sorry. Have we reached out to other municipality that deal with very similar problems?
Yes, council member.
And which, do you know which municipality is that?
So far, I think LA, San Francisco, and I think Oakland.
And so that, if we look at their ordinance and they work on it, it would reduce the amount of research we have to do, right? We can do similar but improvement on their ordinance.
Oh, no, Councilmember, I'm sorry. I was answering the direct question of whether we had reached out to other municipalities. We have reached out to them. None of them have ordinances.
Okay.
There's not an ordinance that either our staff or the departmental staff could find in the state, frankly, addressing this issue. So it was an issue of like first impression in terms of moving down an ordinance path.
And so would the yellow give us, just like when I'm wrenching on my car, I used a torque wrench, right? So it's a very specialized tools, but it's only me working on it. It's the same person who's working on it, just using a different tool, if you will. It doesn't need, I don't need two more bien out there to wrench on that particular torque screw, if you will.
Yeah, to stay on that analogy, maybe I'll try. I think the challenge is, let's say it's you and the jack holding up the car, right? Well, if you and the jack are holding up that car, you and the jack can't also be working on your other car that's next to it that is also impacting your livelihood, your neighborhood. And that's the issue here, is that the staff, there's a fixed number of staff, and the trade-off, back to Vice Mayor Foley's point, is that like asking staff to work on this specifically as a separate matter from the larger context of what happened in the March message, it creates that drag, and that's why it would take much longer to do, and it would be done in a vacuum.
So this analogy is kind of vague, because a jack is a tool that I use to jack up the car to keep it stable. And when I use a torque, it's still me torquing on that torque screw by using a torque wrench, but the jack is a tool, right? The torque wrench.
You can tell I don't work on cars too much, council member.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying, and so it doesn't require more staff times. That's my point. If the person's already working on it, it's just an extra tool for them to create something new.
Yeah, they're not already working on the level of depth necessary to bring you an ordinance. So that's the point.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. And we're going to bring this.
Let me just ask one more follow-up question then. So presumably, if we want to go down the path of an ordinance, there would be a point at which we discuss as a council giving that direction. Is that right? So if we say move forward with the green light option here, that would then come back to the council as an item at some point to discuss, maybe in the fall, moving forward with the actual ordinance. Is that what is anticipated?
I would say not even at some point. I mean, at this point, we're talking about coming back sooner than you had wanted with the...
So sooner with the recommendation, not with the ordinance, though.
Right, but that would be wrapped up in that conversation. That would be a point for council to say, hey, is this let's say we identify 5 gaps, right? And this landlord item is one of those 5 gaps. This is a hypothetical, please don't hold me to this, but if we identified 5 gaps, we come back at May in the study session and say, here are the 5 gaps. One of them is the landlord issue, one of them is, fill in the blanks. Your constituents probably have some insights about those, but at that point, you all might say, you know what, we think this landlord gap is a gap that we need to get plugged. We want to move forward with that one, and here are the budget trade-offs, et cetera. We want to move forward with gap number 2, and you all will make that decision, and then it would be programmed in, if you all do that, into our budget for the next.
And does that necessarily mean that it will be part of the budget study sessions when we have that discussion? Is that the way it would have to be structured?
Sorry, I was trying to see if Angel was going to jump in, but I would say I think there are a couple of options, but one of them is to get it back as part of that study session, the May study session.
I guess I'm still slightly confused, and this is a broader conversation about when we're talking about policy work, do we often, maybe I'm trying to remember past years whether we spend a lot of time at these budget study sessions actually talking about policy work.
No, we don't.
We usually talk about what's in the budget, what are the numbers, and the policy questions kind of come back under separate cover. Is that still something, I mean, do I understand that correctly? And maybe this year, because there's so much policy in the budget, I'm kind of confused about how this is going to play out. But it seems to me that we'd want to have this conversation about these gaps at a separate agenda item, even though they are direction given in the budget message. But that doesn't mean that they are budgetary items that will be in this year's budget.
Yeah, I think the idea of when the response to those items in the March message, like this, under this scenario, those would all come back at the same sort of May timeframe, whether that's in the budget study session or just an agendized council, to have that conversation, and then you all could factor it into your deliberations.
Yeah. So maybe we just back up a little bit and maybe just kind of start with what a green light would get us versus what a yellow light, and then look at the timing from there. So a green light today would basically direct the administration to evaluate this issue against other existing or potential new ordinances to be enforced as outlined in the March budget message, right? So it's kind of more that analysis. And it would also have staff come back with a matrix analyzing existing conditions against a new ordinance. So it'll have that matrix for your info. In addition to that, what staff would also do is evaluate this policy proposal against other efforts in the reducing unsheltered homelessness focus area, right? Back to the Vice Mayor's point around, what would have to stop and start and that kind of thing. So that level of analysis would come back, and it would come back, if you look at the 90-day clock, it would come back to council mid-June, which really puts it right up against, the budget. So most likely, based on that timeline, it won't show up in the form of an MBA or anything like that.
And it won't show up in May during the budget study sessions. It'll come back as a separate item for the agenda in June.
That is correct. Well, and that's under a green light, right?
Under the green light, right?
Yeah.
No, sorry, just to clarify, that green light analysis was to come back in May, not to come back in June. The 90-day was the yellow light. So from a timing standpoint, like if you take a look at the early consideration form, it's under section 1 on page 2, and so it has that timeline. Now, if you went with a yellow light, then this would go back and
staff would have to look at putting this on the priority, can go through priority session, do that analysis, and then at that point, take additional time to do a deeper dive, more comprehensive, come up with a draft ordinance, as well as a second piece to it, which is the implementation of it. So not only the ordinance, the drafting of the ordinance, but how we as a city would enforce it, right? Which is a whole other body of work. That would take much more time, so then that's why the yellow light. So what staff is recommending is that we go with the green light to do further analysis to better understand these issues, and then and even between now and the budget timeframe, there's nothing that would kind of keep any of you from raising this during the conversation and say maybe we need to accelerate this and add additional direction at that time, right? So
Yeah.
that's why we're recommending green lighting that initial option to
And
at least
I'm
keep
just,
going with that
there's just two
analysis.
thoughts I have about, after hearing what you said. Number one is, as an author in the memo, I will just say that it's not always important to me that we right away understand the enforcement mechanism if we decide that our values are such that we want to put in place an ordinance, even if we don't yet have the mechanism to enforce it. So while it's certainly reasonable to have an analysis to say how would we enforce it, we may want to approve an ordinance without enforcement, without proactive enforcement, because we still want to make sure it's on the books that something we think is inappropriate is against our municipal code. The second piece I was just going to, the second piece, which I consider minor, but many people around here are so worried about, and maybe this is a question for you, Kevin. Because we wrote this memo with people who are made up of two different budget Brown Acts, is there an issue if this item comes back as a budget study session item? If there's two different groups, one for this memo and one for the budget?
I don't use the microphone very often, am I on?
Yeah.
So we've given advice on the Brown Act groups on this issue. If the van lording issue has been discussed separately from the bigger Brown Act budget group, then you don't have an issue. So we would caution, and I think we have given this advice already, that if there's a separate van lording Brown Act group, you just need to keep the van lording separate from your overall budget discussion. Because we've talked about this in previous years. The budget can cover so many things.
Yeah.
And that as long as you all in your Brown Act groups are careful to keep these discrete, I'll call them lanes, separate, then we think you're okay under the Brown Act.
Okay. Councilmember Candelas.
No, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I guess I just want further clarity. The green recommendation is just to basically incorporate and fold into the March budget message as it relates to that gap analysis that you described with regards to the van lording issue, correct?
In terms of timing of returning to council, yeah. They're
Correct.
returning to, yes.
Right, and then the yellow option would be a specific ordinance recommendation to come back as a standalone item to council.
Yes, but but it would take much longer.
Right, so outside of the 90-day window.
That's right.
Correct. All right, I just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
All right, Vice Mayor.
Okay, I thought I had it, and I don't. So you're going to do, if we green light this, you're going to do a study. That makes sense. But truly, this is a budgetary, it's part of the mayor's budget message. So if we discuss it at a CSA when we're discussing all the other components of the departments and where this might fit in, it's then going to be potentially incorporated into the mayor's June budget message, correct?
That's correct. That's a possibility.
That's the tricky part with the Brown Act. So, because we're 3 members of a Brown Act, he's in a different Brown Act, budget related, they're in the Van Lord, not Van Lord.
Yeah.
You did Van Lord. Brown Act. So they can only talk about policy. They can't talk about the budget at all when they have their conversations, right?
Well, they can, but they just need to be careful about keeping their van lording discussion in their van lording Brown Act group, but then they need to try to steer clear of the van lording discussions in their budget Brown Act
Right.
group.
But
Yeah.
And I guess the question would be, we wouldn't necessarily be able to talk, or we could talk policy, but we wouldn't talk about how we fund it,
Right.
right? So
Right.
so the funding part is the budget question.
That's the
And maybe
budget,
that's
right.
the way we do distinguish
Right.
it and say it's not an
That's
issue
another
because-
way to slice the
Exactly.
cake,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay,
Because
thank
the
you.
funding discussion is a separate discussion. Back to my point before, crafting an ordinance is the most important thing to me as one of the authors of this memo. And deciding whether or not we put any money into enforcement is a separate discussion, which it's less important to me right now. I want to get an ordinance on the books that says we don't tolerate this kind of behavior. And then we can decide now or later whether we're going to put any resources into going out and proactively enforcing it, or if this is just going to be something on the books, and if somebody, there's a report of something, maybe that, since it's an ordinance, the, PD could investigate, but that's not as much of a funding question than it is a policy question. So maybe that's the way I look at it.
Councilmember, one thing I want to be careful of is that the issue around what I'll call the delay or the length of time to come back on a yellow, which may very well not be until June, July, certainly, it would be longer than the 90-day timeframe that's in the original request, is not just the ordinance piece or the enforcement piece. It's also the work that the attorneys need to do with the departments just to understand. Okay.
Yeah, no, I get that. In other words, we're not yet giving direction to create the ordinance. But even if we give direction later during this spring to create the ordinance, which would come back sometime not before June anyway, it would come back presumably in the fall or later because of how it fits into the priorities of the staff. We could then wait till next year to decide whether we want to fund enforcement. We don't have to fund enforcement in this year's budget.
Okay,
Right.
It's true you could make a determination about the enforcement piece. The green version, if that's where you're headed, gives you the most accelerated
Right.
chance to get back.
That gives us the chance at some point to then direct the city attorney's office to craft the ordinance.
Right.
And all I've been confused about is the appropriate time for us to do that during the budget approval in June, given that it's not a budgetary question, or should this at some point come back to council separately for us to give that direction? I feel like it should, because it may not be a budgetary question in June. It may just be it may be us saying, let's now go and do the work on the ordinance. But I don't know. I mean, we can give direction, I guess, during the budget approval that says go work on the ordinance, but.
But the enforcement of it is a budget issue. And if we don't have that figured out in this budget cycle, it's not going to be figured out until next budget cycle. So we've lost a year.
So yes,
So-
so we may decide during the budget discussion to do some enforcement on this, but the ordinance wouldn't be written by June anyway. But either way, whether we do
Right.
the green light, the ordinance is not going to be ready. The decision about whether to do the ordinance is separate from the decision about whether to fund things that deal with the problems we have on our streets, because we won't have an ordinance by June, even under the green option.
Yeah, so if we're going to move forward, if the committee's wish is to move forward with the green option, you will get the analysis of the options sooner than the 90-day window, and be able to make a determination. Whether that, from a procedural standpoint, comes to its own council meeting, I'll defer to the chair, but I think in terms of getting you the information that you need to move forward one way or the other, that's what that green light option is about. Because it's not just the enforcement, the staff that have to evaluate, for example, just to take one example to make it plain, there's issues related to code questions around van lording, right? And it's like, well, we know that an unlawful stick and mortar business, it's very easy to know what code's role is. When you turn to the lawyers, it's not just the lawyers, they've got to actually work with code, and there isn't staff that are assigned for that body of work, as an example. So that's why I think we need to accelerate getting back to you, so that you can then make a determination in the context of the larger message.
Okay. Councilmember, go ahead, Councilmember Candelas first.
I mean, if Councilmember Duan wants to try to craft a motion, I mean, I'll defer to you. Is that what you want to do?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
First of all, I just have to, I appreciate Councilmember Cohen, and you made a very clear statement. It's a policy, it's an ordinance. We can always look at the budget later to implement it. And my second thought to that is, we have existing staff. This is only an extra tool that they can use to implement it. So I would like to move to accept the yellow line and bring this.
Yellow?
Yellow.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
We can go yellow because it's 90 days, right? Versus
No.
how fast
That's
can
out
you bring
later.
back on the green?
No, the green would be in probably May. I think the yellow would be 120 days or more potentially.
Councilmember Dewan, I believe, look, I think that the pathway for, efficiency and to ensure that we as a council have a full picture of not just van but the issues as it relates to our focus areas that we've all have identified as reducing unsheltered homelessness. I think, I would actually recommend that we do the green light option, which would further analyze this recommendation and fold it into the context of the March budget message. So then we can further define that, whether it's through the study sessions or through the city manager's recommended budget that comes out of the study sessions that typically includes different policies that are discussed in the study sessions for us to be able to negotiate and frame up. So that being said, I'd actually move that recommendation for the committee to consider. Thank you.
All right, let me recraft
Well,
it.
he just moved it, but
Yeah,
if
he moved it.
you can
Yeah,
second it if you
I'll
want,
second.
and then if you want to ask for any
But
amendments.
I want to make sure that before, I'm sorry, let me take that back. Before I second it, I like to bring this back as a separate
Have it, make,
item.
Well, I mean, there's
versus in the budget,
Well,
right?
there's nothing that precludes the administration from bringing back the, correct me if I'm wrong, and this goes to Angel, that there's nothing that states that we can't be able to hear this after the conversation that we have within the context of the budget message and the policy study sessions that we have. And then we can get it back depending on how those conversations go and depending on how the administration brings those recommendations back to us as a council.
all right, Vice Mayor Foley, you're going to help get us back on track here.
Well, I'm going to make it a blue memo, which is green and yellow. Isn't that the combination of that blue?
That was
There you
purple.
go.
No, that would be green and red, or red and, I don't know.
I think
Anyway,
blue's a primary color, but
green
go
and
ahead.
yellow is blue. Anyway, I'm just trying to be clever.
You're being fair, yeah.
Your motion, council member, is a hybrid between the green and the yellow, indicating that this will go back to the budget process and budget being incorporated into the budget. Is that correct? That's your intent, to have this analysis done, presented to us in May, and then incorporated in some point, if we so choose, into the mayor's message in June.
Correct, because according to the administration, it's an evaluation against other efforts, which to your question of
Right.
what would have to be
Right.
traded off with regards to what we're asking the administration to come back to us. And it's important for us to make that prioritization during those substantive policy discussions.
And I would,
I agree,
yeah.
I agree with that. And Councilmember, did you second that motion?
Yes.
His motion, okay. Then thank you. I'm supportive of that because my whole concern about this is resources and not enforcement. They're all pieces that go together. And this is the time to discuss this type of a proposal in the greater context of the budget.
Yes,
And the
yes.
focus area.
And I would argue that, while some of us probably believe that this will rise as an item that should be done, there are other things that fit into this, and we will get that analysis and decide. But then at that point, if we were to say, hey, this is a priority, this is one that should rise, we're still going to have it come back as a separate item to approve an ordinance that would then move
Correct.
forward. So it's the next step, logical step, after we discuss the what happens through the budget analysis, will still be a separate action item because the ordinance has to come forward separately.
And
anyway.
we have to actually provide that explicit direction to come back to, and then the adoption of the ordinance, I think is more process than us talking about the policy and what we want to see within that ordinance.
Yep. So I think this makes sense. Is this clear enough to
Staff?
to staff? Okay, all right. So we have a motion and a second. I think we're done with comments, so let's vote. All right, the motion carries 4-0 with Kamei absent. We are on to open forum. Do we have any members of the public?
No public comment?
All right, then we are adjourned at 2:34 PM. Thank you all for the great discussion.
All right.